we have Jack Driscoll rescheduled from July because of our power failure. And when I came on tonight, we were discussing power failures across the land. Jack Driscoll is the author of 4 books of poems, 3 collections of short stories, and 4 novels. He's received numerous grants and awards, including 2 National Education Association Creative Writing Fellowships, the National Education for, the National Endowment for the Humanities Independent Study Grant, 2 Pushcart Prizes, and the Best American Short Story Citations. He's won the Penn Nelson Algren Fiction Award, the Associated Writing Program Short Story Fiction Award, and 7 Penn Syndicated Project Short Fiction Awards. His work has appeared in magazines such as the Chicago Tribune, Kansas City Star, Civilization, Poetry, Georgia Review, and others too numerous to mention. He was co-founder of the creative writing department at the Interlochen Study for the Arts. And he came to Michigan 46 years ago as a poet from Mystic, Connecticut, his home, where he has recently moved since retirement. And when he came to Michigan, he spent a lot of time immersing himself in the landscape and learning the plants, insects, animals, flowers, and fish of Michigan. And they show up in his work. He gives us a very strong sense of place as an adopted Michigander. Let's welcome Jack Driscoll.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here and happy to talk with you if you want at some point. If you have questions you want to ask me, I'll see if I can answer them. I'll at least try. But what I thought I'd do first is read a story that's new, that's not in the new and selected. It was written just about a month or 2 ago, so it's brand new, and that's always that always buoys my spirits to think, okay, somebody's going to hear it for the first time. And rather than read the story through, I think what I'll do is turn it into a kind of montage or pastiche. In other words, rather than a conventional through line, more like a poof, 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 poof. And I think hopefully it'll come together and it'll make the story shorter. And then I'm going to stop after that and see if any of you have any questions. And if not, I'll do the same with one other story, and so be it. Anyway, this is my first of all, Ed, is the voice good? Am I okay? Or anyone? Yeah.
Yep, they're giving you nods.
Okay.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This is my response to the pandemic, and it's one of the questions Ed mentioned my affiliation with place, and it's true. I was once referred to in Kirkus Review as a no, I'm sorry, this was during an introduction. I was introduced as a no, I'm sorry, it was Kirkus Review that said Jack Driscoll is a Northern Michigan version of Andre Dubus. I remember my editor calling me up and said, "Are you okay with that?" And I said, "Which part? Finding myself in the same in the company of Andre Dubus, or being pigeonholed as a Northern Michigan writer?" It's where I work, and what question I've been getting, I've been doing a lot of interviews, and one of the questions I keep getting is, do you think your work will change because you're in a different environment? Will it reflect that? And this is the story that one reason I'm reading this is because it takes place simultaneously in 2 places, both Michigan and Connecticut. So anyway, my COVID story called Breakdown. The surest sign so far was how she'd opened and then recorked and put away the bottle of Chardonnay without taking a single sip. and began binging instead on dystopian novels. Brave New World, The Hunger Games, Fahrenheit 451. Preparing not for her finals, but rather for the apocalypse was the way in which she'd explained it to herself. The pandemic raging, and when the semester, her final at UConn, went virtual for the third time, she booked a cut-rate one-way flight, the plane 3/4 empty, and landed ahead of schedule without incident in Traverse City, a coastal town 5 hours north of Detroit. And from there, a 45-minute taxi ride to where her father still owned a secluded summer place on Torch Lake. Soon after she'd gotten her driver's license, she'd secretly had her own set of keys made, one for the cottage and another for the long dormant Toyota hatchback stored in the detached one-car garage. Please start, come on, she'd said, coaxing the engine as it coughed and backfired, but caught on the third try, the gas tank almost full, and those outdated mirrored sunglasses with the oversized frames wedged above the passenger side visor. And sure enough, her father's Sarah Vaughan CD still in the player. It being late March and deep in the age of climate change, the ice had already tunneled under, the temperature pushing 55 degrees and the water silver blue. Crows circled and cawed, a raspy airborne dirge she hadn't heard in so long she almost broke into song, a kind of call and response she'd always loved as a kid. Never before had she opened or occupied the cottage by herself, but she'd always assisted her father, paying close attention, and by early afternoon she had a fire going, the portable generator sufficient to power up a couple of lamps and nuke half a pot of coffee in the microwave. Exhausted, she reclined on the giant two-person red leather chair, her mother's old throw, vague perfume scent and all, draped around her shoulders. Then thought about the note she'd scribbled and left unsigned on the kitchen table. Part relief, part queasy feeling, she flip-flopped on whether or not to call the man she'd been living with in New London. A decent, soft-spoken man with fidelity to rituals, systems, and patterns, a logical connect-the-dots kind of thinker, and, for once, a stable presence after all those obsessive, calamitous months of online dating. Slide right, slide left, like some clumsy, perverted version of the box step. They'd met at dusk in the neighborhood park not far from campus, she sitting alone, cross-legged on a bench, he, an elongated silhouette, walking his unleashed dog in her direction. She heard the man say, "Gunner, heel," as the dog barked and bounded towards her, its tail wagging, and first thing, nuzzled its shaggy snout into the crotch of her skin-tight jeans. As she laughed and pushed the pooch away, he moaned and slobbered and licked the wrists of her outstretched arms. "Oh my God, a doodle," she said. "He's gorgeous." The breed she'd always wanted, though for sure she'd get a female, perhaps the runt of the litter, the passed-over puppy, the one no one wanted. And being a humanities and English major, she'd name it Harper, after Harper Lee. "I'm so sorry, my fault entirely. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," the man said, clearly embarrassed and older than she, and in a calm but assertive voice commanded the dog to sit, said, "Settle, that's a good boy," and got down on one knee and stroked the dog's ribs, its collar an iridescent orange beneath the faint, wavering glow of the curve-necked gaslight. When the dog lifted its oversized paw, she leaned forward and shook it and said, "Well, hello there. Aren't you beautiful?" The man apologized a second time and explained the dog, not quite a year old, had just last week completed his obedience training. "Did great," he said. "Head of the class, super fast learner, but short-lived around strangers, all out of controlled ooze and affection." And which was why they'd chosen the park in the late weekday evenings, he explained, where they rarely encountered another person. Canine love, she thought, so loyal and uninhibited, and yes, over the top exuberant for the subtlest attentions. The man revealed he worked for Electric Boat, whatever that was. An engineer, he said, but provided few details about his particular area of expertise. Top secret, state-of-the-art techno something or other, as it turned out, the pinpoint direction, the precise depth and distance of unidentified submarines. Sniffers, that's what we do, he'd later tell her, way down deep beneath all the 7 oceans. By mid-afternoon and all bundled up, she'd gone for a drive to try and clear her head while the cottage warmed, the moon roof open to blue sky and sunshine, and Sarah Vaughan belting out "Shake Down the Stars." She remembered how her father, leaning against the headrest, would snap his fingers and sing along, and just like that, like magic, she flashed back to the year she turned 14, the year before her parents divorced, a messy and pricey and bitter drag-down affair, opposites, as it turned out, even enemies. Jumping ahead again. If it were summer, she'd paddle her blow-up plastic raft out to where the pontoon would normally be buoyed, exactly as she used to, and stretched out her face. She'd unlock at the clasp of her bikini top, a pack of cigarettes and a couple of her father's ice-cold beers smuggled into a styrofoam cooler. If she could unmake the present and replay the world back then when it was, if she could unmake the present and replay the world to back then when she was what? Not unhappy, her opening salvo would include a jackknife or cannonball or solo lover's leap every hour to cool off. And the water always so crystal clear she could see with her mask and snorkel all the way to the rocky bottom, and the slow fanning translucent tails of lake trout. Silver sides, torpedoes, that's what she called them, depending on her moods. She'd dream deep, peaceful dreams and sometimes be awakened by her father, his tongue curled back under index finger and thumb, and, leaning over the deck railing, he'd whistle her in ahead of the thunderstorms, just minutes before they rumbled and cracked, whitecaps building and the lightning snapping behind her like bullwhips. That life. But fast forward to a few minutes ago, her phone vibrating, and she'd already played Preston's garbled, all but indecipherable voicemail 6 times, his tone distant and matter-of-fact, the realest of stark, dark certainties. Are you all right? We should talk, don't you think? And the sooner the better, and sort out whatever's going on. You could start by telling me where you are and why, and, if you know, how long you plan to go missing. Go missing, she thought, as in search parties, as in all points bulletins, and in the background, what she was sure was the muted sound of snowballs exploding against the picture window, and Gunner barking, ears cocked and tearing from room to room, the neighborhood kids gone ape shit again, having sneaked out of their homes to rampage against the injustice, the unrelenting boredom of their young lives. The phone right there on the oval glass coffee table in front of her, she closed her eyes, hands squeezed between her thighs, and pitched slowly forward and back, so short of breath, she reached for her inhaler, pumped it twice, and emitted a wheeze that Preston still, after all this time, mistakes for crying. She'd been doing a lot of that too. After all this, she'd been doing a lot of that too, right out of the blue, hiccups and muffled sobs, the mercury rising on cold nights, then plummeting under the fiery eye of daylight. Everything corrupted, everything backwards and upside down. Had he uttered even one more word, she would have changed her voice message to please hang up and try again. They'd set up house together, his designation after only their second date, her dormitory living arrangement, a nightmare. dead-faced, open-wounded zombies staggering up and down the halls, faces contorted as if gnawing at their own tongues, like something out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The ground floor crypt, that's how she described it to her parents. All those whacked out, hungover co-eds standing naked in the early morning shower line of grief and regret, the blinding white tiles, the ceiling lights caged in wire. She needed her own bathroom, a tub in which to soak in the late evenings and contemplate her future, her thus far non-existent career plans. All true, though her mother early on had single-handedly squelched the notion of any and all off-campus rentals. Even if Amber's father was the one who continued to sign the checks and settle her credit card debts, and the one who years earlier splurged for her on a brand new, never before mentioned telescope. First thing, upon her arrival, she lugged it out through the sliding glass door onto the deck and placed the tripod at a diagonal, like a spotting scope. The night predicted to be clear and still, and the lens so powerful she could read license plate numbers 100 yards down the rutted fire road. Or better yet, the wild, hazel-colored eyes of coyotes, wolves, as her mother believed, Beauty and the Beast, Little Red Riding Hood, American Werewolf in Paris. On the full moon, Amber could hear them yowling as if calling to her. She'd jerk awake, tiptoe outside, and the viewfinder pressed to her eye. She'd watch their shiny, lustrous pelts riffle, and on a south breeze, she'd breathe in that musky spray, the spray scent the males always left, marking their territory. By daybreak, they'd long vanished, and at breakfast, she'd withhold from her parents how she imagined she could entice them to eat roadkill from her bare hands, and the pack possibly even adopt her as one of their own. And how those wild and ravenous, night-blooming purple and white irises soaked up so much mist, she believed they'd turn to vapor and float away like disappearing starlight. I'm going to jump 3 more pages. Betrayer. That's what she thought as she stoked the fire and unlatched and let down the fold-away bed concealed in the living room wall. Of course, she would barely fit anymore into such a tiny enclosure, but it was where she wanted to curl up and tuck in for the night, fairy dust sprinkled above her forehead. She unzipped the mummy bag and fluffed up the feathers, and as she reached over and switched off the stand-up lamp, she noticed how the fireplace flames cast shadows, not so much formless, but rather shape-shifting as they slowly ascended. Angels, she thought, ghosts, apparitions that bunched and hovered between the crossbeams and roof rafters. It being a one-season cottage, she'd never actually seen the lake frozen over, though some nights back home she'd envisioned skating backwards, away from the lighted windows, watching the cottage grow smaller and smaller, and wondered how far she'd get before it vanished completely, and whether or not she could find her way back. Always, she whispered, and from anywhere. And not a living soul with a clue as to her whereabouts, no blood trail to follow, no forwarding address. Her stomach growled, and she rolled out of her sleeping bag and reached into her carry-on, and mere minutes after she devoured the snacks, bile rose in her chest and throat like warm, stale bourbon. Woozy and disoriented, and before she could even sip from her glass of water, she eyeballed the empty rocking chair moving back and forth by itself, as if whoever had been sitting there just seconds before had gotten up and walked away into another life. A cigarette smoldered in the ashtray, a Carlton, the brand she used to smoke, and she fixated on how the ash burned back all the way to the filter without ever falling or breaking off. Whose? She wanted to know, and sniffed between her index and middle finger, where those gross, dark, tea-colored nicotine stains used to grow before the soaps and astringents and fade creams. Sometimes she'd mix and use all three at once to no effect, and followed by that frantic, nonstop filing with a pumice stone until she'd rubbed her skin raw. She steadied herself with both hands, the entire knotty pine interior suddenly shifting and tilting, except for the satellite photo map of the lake, ungodly still and big as an inland sea attached to the far wall. She remembered how one night she cracked the slider and listened to the sound of ice tines tinkle like chimes as they piled high and thick along the shoreline, in August, no less, as the northern lights surged and erupted like silent, faraway fireworks. Shivering and her teeth chattering, she noticed that even the embers had died out in the fireplace. She could see her breath, and down on her knees she arranged a double wreath of wadded up old newspaper under the andirons, followed by some kindling, then two split dry logs. And when she held up and flicked a stick match as her father had taught her, the blue sulphurous head flared above her thumbnail and her phone buzzed again. This time she answered and immediately recognized the young girl's voice. Every syllable and the face, mere inches away on the screen, seemed a mirror image of Amber at 10, or possibly 11 at the oldest. Chin for chin, cheekbones, nose, and eye color, the holes in her earlobes, bangs cut straight across. When she offered her left hand, she swore she could feel the warm heels of their palms touch their outspread fingers exactly the same length, and their nails polished and shimmering like pearls. She even envisioned their arteries pulsing, blood in perfect sync through the crimson chambers of each other's hearts. If they swapped places, no one would be the wiser, and not a soul alive would find them out. "Hello," Amber said, barely above a whisper, as if, in hiding and in high alert, she'd been waiting up for this exact moment her entire life. Not talking in tongues for once, and without interruption, one to the other, unguarded, dismissive of nothing, and no matter where the conversation led, not a single stolen secret, not a word retracted or withheld, a language both foreign and beautiful and all but extinct in that other world. Neither girl went silent or interrupted, and neither hesitated or balked. Every note pitch perfect, like a made-up song they sang in the dark. Dream makers, doppelgangers, and those tired half-moon circles under their eyes expanding like luminous pools of black and blue. Outside, a sudden barometric shift and a full-blown winter storm out of nowhere. A whiteout so dense that when Amber opened the door and reached out, she could see nothing but white beyond her elbow, snow swallowing the lightless air. She breathed in and out, took 2 or 3 forward steps, cupped both hands around her mouth, and called into that vast emptiness, offering shelter, offering this sacred, traceless place, this last safe haven of ancient rites and diminished hopes made holy. "Over here," she said, and though no one answered, she promised herself she'd stay up as long as she could, until dawn, if need be, waiting and waiting for all the unaccounted for others just like her, and who, she was certain, must be out there somewhere, lost and lonely and running for their lives. So that's my abbreviated version of the story. And I'd be happy if you'd like to ask me questions about the story or about writing. I'm guessing that most of you are writers. So have at it, if you will.
If anyone has a question, remember to unmute to ask it. Anyone at all? I don't see anyone, Jack. So I'm going to move myself back up and you can move on with the program. Oh, wait a minute. Paul, did you have a question? Paul Bernstein, I see you unmuted. Did you have a question? Nope, he doesn't. He muted again. Okay, Jack, carry on.
That was a lot of reading. You should ask me a question. My throat is okay, I'm going to do the same thing. This is in the book. The story is in the book. This is it's called 20 Stories, new and selected, and it's made up of 5 stories from my first short story collection, 5 from the second, 5 from the third, and then 5 new stories. And this is a story I wrote for my daughter. And it's a story I'm going to read in part because I've never written a character like this before. I'm talking about the narrator. It's a first-person story, and it's the longest title in the book. It's called "If My Father Had Ever Hugged Me, Even Once, I Would Have Become an Accountant." Against the odds, I did anyway. A certified CPA and who at 43 has already outlived my old man by almost a decade. A fact I accept and do my best not to dwell on. As my wife Lizzie, an incurable optimist, 7 months pregnant with our first child, reminds me, live in the moment, Lloyd, eat while the food's still hot. And yet just this morning, she read aloud an article asserting that somewhere in the blur of those first whispers or lullabies resides that one remembered something that every newborn stores away and is either formed or broken by. She's bright, curious and open-minded, but likewise vulnerable to such far-flung New Age confabulations. I half listened, sipped my coffee, and without annoyance or protest, opened our local newspaper, its contents unremarkable, though grounded nonetheless in issues both relevant and commensurate to our middle-class life here in the suburbs. A practitioner of common sense goals and agendas, it's not a reach to believe I was born to this. Systems, scales, and statistics, and long-suffering and badly in need of companionship. Some years back, I adopted on a trial basis from the SPCA an aging half-deaf schnauzer, trimmed his snout and the shaggy tangle half covering his eyes, removed the choke chain collar, and on the spot and befitting his sweet but nervous and finicky disposition, changed his name from wonder to reality. Lucky for us, Lizzie and me, that apparently opposites do attract and then run parallel. Take our recent marriage, for instance, her third, my first, her exuberant, carefree laugh, juxtaposed to my earnest but tentative, thin-lipped smile. And whereas most nights it's lights out for me by 9:30, she stays up reading Jane Austen and George Eliot. She's 4 years younger. She looks it too. And without exception, during our courtship, she remained rigid and intractable on no front other than to have a baby before she aged out, her every desire directed and streamlined to that end. Me, not so much. The buzz of paternal longing, a myth I assumed in my genetic profile. At best, a passing twinge or two, and so when finally I acquiesced and popped the question, ring in hand, she said, "Well, hello there, family man." Prior to my arrival, she'd partied hard, circling the drain, as she said, a long-standing history of getting messed up all over again. 3 speeding tickets, a DUI and suspended driver's license, not to mention a 24 24-hour hold and lockup, and what she deems currently to be the rockiest, most reckless interludes of her life. But here's the better news. That's over. And on the day we closed on the mortgage, I mounted the stairs 2 at a time and carried her across the threshold of our modest split level into what she now refers to as the safe, good life. Already a percentage of every paycheck is portioned to accrue in total an Ivy League education, or more likely its Midwestern equivalent. By the year 2014, we've listened to the baby's heartbeat, our daughter, and some nights I imagine following that sound out beyond the star mist and into a dimension where the inventory of all human peril collapses around us like a parachute of silver and gold. For my birthday joke gift last May, Lizzie gave me a t-shirt that said "Forward" on the front and "Thinking" across the back. That's me. Measured, reliable, steady as he goes, a grown-up. The S-curve into our cul-de-sac, as Lizzie says, my nerdy homespun version of the Autobahn. It's true. I drive a low-mileage pre-owned Oldsmobile Cutlass with an extended bumper warranty and 4 brand-new all-season Goodyear radials. Unlike my old man, I schedule tune-ups and oil changes weeks in advance. I blaze no trails. I honor guardrails and rumble strips, steer hard right, and pass only vehicles stranded in the breakdown lane. Certain Friday afternoons during rush hour, men twice my age stare over from low in their seats and flip me the bird. Lizzie's 5'5", and I'm going to skip ahead a little more for you. This, there's a section that ends with this line. It's a piece of dialogue. Get it once and for all out of here before one of us snaps. It's such bad karma, this negative energy. My God, just look at us. Start with me, who's been employed for 18 years by the downtown firm of Sidewall and Slime, as a wisecracking ex-co-worker of mine used to say. The malign was neither accurate nor amusing. In fact, it struck me dumb, given the opportunities for advancement, a possible partnership in trust down the road. Add to that the benefits and perks, and which include a box seat at Fifth Third Bank Field, home of the West Michigan Whitecaps, AAA, an office, I suppose, away from the office, and located exactly midway between Third and home plate, and where committed and loyal middle-aged lifers like yours truly are encouraged to entertain prospective clients. Already on my ledger, the Yankee Air Museum and Bellotoc Bottling, and among others too numerous to mention, the Maids of Marriage, a nonprofit legal counsel in support of women screwed royally in divorce settlements. Do I donate to it? No more or less than I do to all worthy causes, with an honest and thorough down to the last dime quarterly statement indicating either their solvency or debt, who's benefited, who's lost. Otherwise, I remain uninvolved, administer no counsel, and concentrate instead on managing and taking care of what I can. Between you and me, I've never attended baseball games alone. Between you and me, I've only ever attended baseball games alone. My collar up, cap pulled low on my brow, and only when Lizzie is out of town visiting her sister Ginger in Ypsilanti. I decline all such invitations and can estimate to within minutes her time of arrival there. She has, needless to say, no clue as to my whereabouts. If I'm at the ballpark, her calls go to the answering machine and otherwise on my person at all times, and immediately after I park the car, I stash my business cards in the glove box. I'm no kind of athlete. I never was. And for sure, no fan of cheering crowds and long talking and loud talking hawkers hauling shoulder trays of chili dogs, pretzels, peanuts, and cold beer. It could be that I attend solely to watch the miracle of small children careen the base paths between innings. Their shouts are like songs whenever I'm able to silence those tremulous organ notes exploding from the stadium speakers, the outfielders orphaned in that endless green sea of outgoing tide. I'd never admit it outright, but I don't give a rat's patootie whether the home team loses or wins. Or, as my old man would no doubt translate from the grave, who cares about baseball or about any other goddamn thing? He who either purchased or pilfered for me my first mitt and then paced 30 feet across our backyard, absent any turf, and sidearm pitches so hard and fast they caused my right palm to blister and bleed. Lizzie would have a field day speculating about why it calms me to fill out the scorecard, the logic of its digits and codes, the early season attendance so slight that foul balls thwack and rattle against the seat backs in row after empty row. She'd prod and encourage me to open up, get out in front of whatever it is, be more forthcoming about what, I'd like to know. That I've witnessed games called not because of rain or fog or lousy franchising, but rather because some nights the neon scoreboard looms like a square pink and yellow moon that freezes the batters in mid-swing, freezes something in me. My old man demonstrating not a headfirst slide beside the foul-smelling diamond-cut square of old carpeting and the junked-out television set, but there he is, passed out, and it's not even noon. And my mom running towards us from the house, fingers flicking as if to shoo me away, and shouting, "Leave him alone, Lloyd. Leave him alone, Lloyd. He's just short of sleep is all. You know how he gets, no harm done." Always the automatic reset to these same lies and cover-ups, and guaranteeing us no chance whatsoever to believe then or ever in a safe and happier outcome. Beyond belief is what I think, but correct her under the circumstances. You're as bad as your old man with his unshaved mug, half buried in the dust, his mouth wide open, eyes rolled back into his brain. And yet, on the last day of Pee Wee League tryouts, he's there. He's reemerged from somewhere, maybe to begin his way into my good graces and finally set things right. He calls me sport, tousles my hair because I've made the cut. I'm on the team, though later that same week I whiffed 3 consecutive times, and when I boot an easy 2-hopper back to the mound, his face behind the chain link backstop incandesces like fire in the early twilight, already fading away. And this ends this story. Again, I'm jumping ahead a few pages here. She has her first contractions 3 weeks early. We're assured this is normal, merely tremors of the breasts. It's Saturday, and while she naps, I test the stroller, as I've done at least half a dozen times already, up and down the driveway. I've assembled it step by careful step according to the instruction manual. Fancy silver spoke wheels. They're more like bicycle tires, lightweight, finely calibrated and balanced for less resistance. And given that Lizzie's a runner, check out her calves. She says that our child will know the world early on by that rhythmic beat of her mother's feet on the pavement. I exercise on a treadmill, each tenth of each digital mile accumulating to maintain a desired weight of 168 pounds. That's where I'm holding at this exact moment, down in our basement, listening to the steady sound of my own breathing. Lizzie argues that hyper walking at 3 a.m. has less to do with staying in shape than driving myself ragged and loony. A liability, as she says, and that I'm making ready for a stroke or heart attack, a nervous breakdown. But as far as sleep aids and willpower, I've priced them out weeks ago as worthless. So here I am again, navigating by the odometer's dim red glow. In inverse ratio to the baby's due date, my legs and lungs are marathon tested. In fact, just last night, I closed my eyes and envisioned passing through town after small town on the outskirts of nowhere in particular, but always ending up at the exact same playground, benches abandoned, swing seats hanging low and stationary, and where I continued to run in place, the northern lights so bright that the monkey bars and the slide and the chrome arms of the seesaw nearly blinded me. Nobody else naturally is ever around at this hour, just me stripped to my boxers and sweat-soaked t-shirt, a soon-to-be father who has never fed or burped or even turned on a sprinkler for the neighborhood kids. Anxiety attacks is Lizzie's take, the result, she speculates, of following that same long out-of-date mental map back into my past, refusing to ignore or let it go, a hypothesis with which I do not disagree, and why I always end up right here, smack dab in our own house, frightened and disoriented and so entirely alone. Yes, I've opened that door, owned up to her that as a kid, I believed Chicago was a state close by, not a city, and where my old man promised we'd someday visit, but of course never did. No worries, no hurry, he'd say, and that he'd make it up to me. Sooner or later, we'll get even, mark my words, though it sounded more like a threat or a vendetta than a plan. Like maybe he'd lost a couple quarters to the cigarette vending machine and figured to bust the whole damn thing wide open with a tire iron or Louisville slugger. Make off with a little silver, but either way, we'll get there. You'll see, he said, all in good time, though each next day arrived and left without us ever once climbing into the van and going anywhere the slightest bit fun as a threesome. One night after he'd vanished again, I heard what I took to be a long-delayed, oncoming train's distant whistle and, on all fours, made my slow way to the open upstairs bedroom window, and where I waited and waited, chin on the sill, until the low clouds parted and the rain stopped, and there, standing directly below me in that sudden glint of moonlight, was my mom, soaked and stoop-shouldered and hugging herself, her silhouette stock still in those unmistakable notes of someone crying and crying, not unlike me, the last two stranded passengers of the night. Lloyd, Lizzie says, sounding winded and far away, do you have any idea what time it is, how long you've been down here? Please stop beating yourself up and come to bed. I nod and slow the pace, but when I squint in her direction, she's merely a blur in her white nightgown, a disembodied voice, a ghost or vision lifted by the breeze through the slider screen and carried away. And these are the last two paragraphs. She's born Catherine Carol Quigley, middle named for her grandparents on Lizzie's side and who live in Milwaukee. I've met them only one time. Likeable souls, if first impressions hold, cheery, old world Irish, minus the accent. Although they've yet to see the baby, Lizzie's provided them with snapshots along with all the permanent information. Weight, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, length 20.28 inches, time of birth, the dusk, low-hanging and turning to night. I watched her arrival, and when I whispered her name, I was the first to speak it. Our daughter, with her father's dark hair, her mother's puffed out cheeks, as if already huffing her own slow and determined way into the universe. I'm just minutes home after seemingly endless workday, and have entered the house quietly on tiptoes past the swivel lounger where Lizzie often cradles and hums and nurses our daughter. I continue into her bedroom and turn on no lights, the full moon through the window so enormous and bright that I gather her wide awake from her crib and carry her outside to the back deck. We sit on the top step, her back on my lap, head resting in the slight depression between my knees, her face illuminated, eyes open and staring right at me. She turns 7 weeks old tomorrow, and this typical, ordinary late August shows no signs of fall except for the sudden briefness of the days, and the tips of the spruce trees gloss silver as if with frost. Soon enough, the leaves will go, later the snow, her first winter, her first few steps sometime next spring. But for right now, she raises both tiny hands, fingers dancing in all directions, as if evenly divided on where to wave, or to whom, though other than the crickets and the fireflies and the quickly disappearing arc of those few shooting stars, it's just the two of us, and I whisper, "Hi," and touch my index finger to my thumb, and fit it around my eye like a monocle or viewfinder, and lean in close and wink. She smiles, kicks her booted feet, and then tips her head ever so slightly toward the continuous whirl of the sky. This night, this imprint, this longing, that is ours.